Hello and welcome to Simply inTAXicating. Treaty abuse is a global phenomenon, and it happens when a stronger economy grants or gifts taxing right to a weaker or a smaller trading partner, which tends to facilitate treaty shoppers and round trippers to its advantageous treaty position. And this is what happened in case of India-Mauritius tax treaty. But with India and Mauritius finally agreeing to sign a protocol amending the tax treaty, it is being said that a major route for leakage of Indian revenue has finally been plugged. How true it is? Or there are still some open areas which can be exploited by treaty shoppers or round trippers. We have 4 distinguished panelists. We will try to find out and find an answer to all these questions. We have Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan, Chief Commissioner of Income Tax International Taxation, Mr. Rupesh Jain, Partner Vasan Associates, Mr. D P Sengupta, Consulting Editor Tax India International and former Chief Commissioner of Income Tax, and Mr. Vasan, a very familiar face in the international taxation domain. So let me start with Mr. Ranjan. Sir, please brief us how exactly we managed the 2 decades of efforts, the official efforts to have dialogue, negotiation, persuading the Mauritian revenue authorities to finally come to the table and agree to some of the viewpoints which India has been talking about it. So what were the clinchers or the something which clinched the deal for us?
Well, I think Mauritius has been on the table for a long time. So we have been having talks for the last 15 years. There have been issues which were discussed, almost finalized, reconsidered. Things have been going on and on. But you know, things have been changing in the world. Now, I think it's the major part of the reason for this breakthrough or this thaw would be that the world over opinion was changing. Use of treaties for avoiding of tax was no longer being looked at as a honorable exercise.
Right.
In fact, you are aware that in the BEPS project, in the report, in Action 6 of the BEPS, the recommendation is very clear that the treaties must make it clear that they are not to be used for tax avoidance. Now, all that, the international consensus on this point obviously affected Mauritius as well as other countries. And so I think it was just as a normal progression of time that Mauritius also realized that it has to move with the world.
Right. How do you look at this was a treaty which is the protocol being amending the tax treaty after 30 years. I mean, this should have been utilized by India, have been done very well in amending it. We have been able to plug most of it, or the Mauritian people, we could not convince them or could not agree with us in toto to amend all the relevant provisions which are being abused or misused. So how do you look at this amendment?
Concept of treaty shopping through Mauritius is something which is fairly well known. In fact, in Azadi Bachao, the Supreme Court gave its stamp of approval. According to the Supreme Court, developing countries perhaps are entitled to indulge in treaty shopping so as to attract investment. So there is always a dichotomy, a tension between investment, foreign investment, and the revenue that is being foregone. Whether that kind of investment we want or not is something which is important. The Mauritius Treaty is there right from 1983, but see, the misuse of the treaty started only in the 90s when the capital market was open to investment from abroad. At that time, people discovered the provisions of capital gains and started misusing the Mauritius Treaty. So, whether it was intentionally kept open or not is a matter of speculation. But I guess now there is a realization that perhaps this kind of investment is not necessary. And that's why, as Akhilesh said, there is a worldwide movement against treaty shopping, although it is not so well pronounced in the Indian circle. There are a lot of people who still think that we should allow treaty shopping. In fact, in the protocol amending the treaty, the limitation of benefits provision is there. And if you see that limitation of benefits, we will perhaps come to it later, you will see that it is only restricted to capital gains.
Right, sir.
And so there may be other areas where the treaty is still beneficial. In fact, there is a beneficial provision in the interest section.
Right, for the banking.
And so maybe the treaty will continue to be abused by people. So that's something which we'll have to wait and see whether this is all, or as Akhilesh says, there is a consensus in the international community that to put a line in the treaty saying that the treaty is not meant to be abused.
Okay, I see,
so
sir.
that kind of thing is not there in the treaty right now.
Right, sir.
So maybe subsequently, when we sign the multilateral agreement in October, I suppose.
Maybe next year, I think it will be ready by December.
Right,
okay, so maybe something will happen at that time. We will have to wait and see. So it does. It has made some progress. It has plugged quite a few areas, but the scope of complete misuse is still not completely done away with.
So, Mr. Washington, do you really think that the Mauritian route is really dead so far as foreign investment is concerned? It is still attractive. If somebody is willing to, cup off little bit to the Indian tax kitty, and then you make use of the treaty provisions. So, how do you look at it?
Just one example from the provision itself, Article 5.2, which talks about service PE, which has been now brought. Earlier in 1982, it was only fixed place and agency PE. Now they have brought service PE. And particularly, it is addressing furnishing of services, including consultancy. So clearly, as Akhilesh ji pointed out, it's more to financial services which are rendered from outside of India into India, where the beneficiary is here. So now they have brought it. When you see the wording of that, it's not in line with UN model. UN model clearly says it should be in the other contracting state. That other contracting state is silent here. That means even the contracting state where the services are rendered from, beneficiary is here, I will tax them.
Mr. Rupesh Jain, how do you look at it? What Mr. Washington said.
Yeah, yes. If we look at the capital gains provision, what has been plugged is the exemption in relation to shares. Now, apart from shares, there could be several other instruments. For example, debt instruments, debentures, derivatives, P-notes. So, these are all instruments which are not really targeted by the protocol. So, only if shares in an Indian company are being transferred that the capital gains exemption which is available is sought to be plugged. Now, in case of debenture, if that is transferred and there is gains in relation to debentures, that would still continue to be exempt. Similarly, in case of derivatives also, where the underlying is the share, but it is not the share of the Indian company which is getting transferred. What is getting transferred is the derivative instrument, which derives its value from the underlying share. But that is still continue to be exempt irrespective of the protocol. Similarly, in case of P-notes, if there is a transfer of P-note outside of India and by one Mauritius entity to another Mauritius entity, again P-note is a derived instrument. Yes, underlying security is the share, but still it would not attract the taxation under the protocol.
P-notes we will discuss. I think this merits little more discussion, but is it correct, so this interpretation that since we are talking about only the shares in the protocol, the other hybrid instruments are probably out of it? Is it correct interpretation, sir, or this is being speculated or?
No, I think there's a fair point that Rupesh is making out here. I mean, because of our domestic law also brands all these sorts of income as almost capital gains. So
right,
now,
okay.
If it's something in derivatives, well, that does take it away from the scope of the provisions. Similarly, I mean, interest provision that Mr. Sengupta mentioned. So, well, I don't think we should look at it as a very comprehensive effort to block all loopholes. The idea was to really make a very strong statement internationally. And I think Mauritius and India have shown themselves to be very mature in developing economies by telling the world that, look, we are the first to make a move forward on this. And it is not easy to suddenly change, 3 decades of relationships. So the industry in Mauritius would be apprehensive. The industry in India would be apprehensive. So it's always better to move slightly cautiously, move slowly, but at the same time conveying a very strong intention. And I think that's how we should look at it.
Actually, you may see a move from Mauritius being seen as a route of making equity investment to debt investment. Okay. Because you see, the interest rate has also been brought down to 7.5. In the treaties which India has, the rate ranges from 10 to 20%. In the domestic law, it is 20%. But you have a concessional rate of 7.5% in the Mauritius treaty. So there is a possibility that Mauritius is used as a route for debt investment instead of equity investment. That possibility still exists.
So this is it? I mean, should it be taken that it was a deliberate decision by both the contracting parties, India and Mauritius, not to define share in the protocol? Share has not been defined. So that is why, sir, this confusion, little bit of confusion and speculation. And of course, we'll go back to the domestic provisions to find out whether share also means all the hybrid instruments, etc. Sir.
No, I think it is obviously. I mean, after so many years of deliberation and negotiation, if we have come to an agreement, so I mean, you can't say that there is any omission or mistake or anything on their part. Every word is pregnant with possibilities.
Right, sir. Right.
So shares, I think, have been deliberately that word has been used. And the other point is that it is only of course it is restricted to shares, so there is no doubt about it. Other instruments don't come into this thing. The only thing is, like, for example, convertible debentures will obviously not be shares. Debentures will not be shares. One can perhaps quibble about preference shares, whether they are shares or mostly shares, or in the nature of equity or in the nature of debt. But otherwise, the intention is very clear that shares will be, the favorable position that obtain in respect of shares will no longer be there. That is also from 2019.
Right, correct.
You may be able to defer the taxation, but you will not be able to avoid the taxation altogether. For example, even in case of P notes or derivative instruments, at some stage there will be a sale of the underlying instrument. That is a share in the Indian company. At that point of time, there would be capital gains. So you may be able to defer it, but you may not be able to avoid it altogether.
Also, if you see a debt vis-a-vis a capital, there is a clear distinction. Even if you look at the EU taxation, where the thin capitalization, which I am sure Akhilesh ji should be working on, and I should see that very soon. So a ratio of debt to equity, which could also be brought in by India anytime in the near future. So given that this could be taken care of through that mechanism, where they could balance out if people are trying to move from equity to a debt and then route it through that process. See, even in that situation, as Rupesh pointed out, either of the state should be able to tax that. It won't be tax-free. See, the whole purpose of double taxation treaty is to ensure any one of them tax, not both the people tax, nor it is left untaxed.
Yes, right.
So that's the intention. So given that, I'm sure that should be the way, and with the thin capitalization which is going to be drawn sometime by India also, because we also have to move into the international tax arena, which we are already moving in. We are moving well ahead of other developing countries. So I'm sure we would be moving into that direction to lock this capital vis-a-vis a debt market conversion and exploitation.
Right. So this limiting this LOB to only 2 years, sir. I mean, how do you like to sort of look at it? It was a deliberate, sir.
Well, I think it was an agreement on this shares, provision for shares, and then in order to make it acceptable to both sides, we brought in the LOB for the shares.
Only for the shares.
And, and as Mr. Sengupta said, retained the word shares.
Right.
So, treaty negotiation is all about trying to accommodate each other's views.
Absolutely.
On that point. So, what is going to happen later on? I mean, internationally things are going to move. The recommendations of the BEPS project on Action 6 will be incorporated in a multilateral instrument, and even otherwise they are supposed to be followed by countries. More and more countries are joining up the movement to accept the BEPS recommendations.
Yes.
And there's nothing to prevent a more comprehensive LOB article coming up in the treaty, in the same treaty at a future date.
Okay.
Mauritius is participating in the development of that multilateral instrument as much as India is.
India is, right.
So if both of us at that point of time agree on the instrument and if both sign it, then then there could be a change in the LOB article. So
that could be
things
perhaps
could
the
change,
reason.
things will change.
If both India and Mauritius sign that multilateral agreement,
Right.
but I do not know, I mean, how, I mean, the OECD has now just released a discussion draft on that.
Yes, sir.
So how exactly it will be achieved, whether all the articles will be considered or whether some minimum number of articles will be considered. But I think the minimum standard is there relating to the fact that the treaty should not be allowed to be misused.
That's
I
right.
think that is a minimum
That is,
standard.
yes.
That will certainly come in.
That will
Right,
certainly come in. So, to a certain extent, later on, I mean, maybe after 1 year, there may be another change in the India-Mauritius treaty through that
multilateral agreement. So right, and that is why probably the India-Mauritius they did not force each other to go for more at this stage.
Yeah, it's managing expectations of lots of people.
Yes. Perhaps that could be the reason. So, sir, you are saying that it is certainly not. It has not India-Mauritius. Because of the treaty, it has not impacted the attractiveness of India as a favorite investment destination.
I wouldn't know, the investors would tell you that, but
and maybe Mr. Rupesh Jain is
Rupesh
perhaps
could.
and Mr. Vasan is the right person to comment on this.
Right.
What kind of feedback is coming? The reactions from across the world that India remains a very attractive destination for investors.
You see, so taxation is only one part of it.
Right.
You have to look at other economic parameters
Absolutely.
also.
Absolutely.
It's a big market, huge market.
Right.
It's an emerging economy which is doing better than others. There is a change in the thinking, and then as Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan pointed out, that internationally there is a focus on avoiding double non-taxation. The
Right.
BEPS project is aimed at that only.
Right.
Then GAR provisions are also going to come into force from 1/4/2017.
Right.
So even if this amendment had not been made, GAR would have triggered in from 1/4/2017, and maybe these kind of arrangements where you are having investments through Mauritius would have got caught within the ambit of GAR, and the exemption may not have been available because GAR provisions override the tax treaties.
Right.
So taxation is one part of it. And the government of India has acted in a very matured manner because it has given sufficient time for people to rearrange their affairs. So if there are certain structures already in place, there is sufficient time to unwind those structures, and think about new strategies.
Absolutely.
So we have time until the 31st of March of 2017
Right.
to take corrective actions if you have to. So I would think that taxation is one part of it, and it would not really impact investments to the extent we might fear.
Here we will take a commercial break, and once we come back, we will have little more debate on other amendments in the India-Mauritius tax treaty.
TIOL has launched yet another specialized portal focused on a large basket of corporate laws. It covers a host of laws such as competition law, IPR laws, capital market laws, Companies Act, FEMA, and many others.